Thank you, Chairwoman Titus, for holding this hearing today, and thank you all for being here. I recently came back from my district work period where I held a roundtable in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. The purpose of the roundtable was to discuss the dissemination of flood recovery funding. In 2016, 3 schools in Nicholas County, West Virginia, were destroyed due to flood damage. During the storms, hundreds of people were displaced from their homes and 26 people died. The reality is that we have people who have been in temporary housing since 2016, and we have schools that need to be rebuilt. It is inexcusable that it has taken 3 years to put people back into their homes and rebuilding our schools. I understand that the community recovery is a long process. However, we all have people in our districts that need help. We owe it to our constituents to be efficient and to make sure that they are receiving the funding that they need. Mr. Bayard, how can the federal government incentivize states to encourage the state to spend money in a timely manner and to ensure that the money is given to the people who have suffered from the disaster?
Ma'am, I want to make sure I can answer your question correctly. So from the FEMA aspect and perspective, the authorities that we have to help individuals is our individual assistance program, which we do direct financial assistance and other assistance directly to the disaster survivors. As far as what the state may do over and above that, I'm not familiar with that state to state. Also, I know and I believe that there was a CDBG-DR allocation for West Virginia that was for the purposes of housing. And again, I would have to yield to HUD for the specifics and the state for the specifics on that. I do and am familiar with the schools that you referenced, and I know our regional administrator, Mary Ann Tierney, has been there multiple times. She's a fantastic representative of FEMA, and we're working through that now. Some of that had to do with some environmental studies and surveys, so I know we're making progress on the schools, but I don't want to overspeak on the exact housing question that you had, because I know we do direct grants to individuals based on the eligibility requirements of each citizen.
Thank you, and I will say that Ms. Tierney has been very helpful and has met with us several times.
Yes, ma'am.
How are you working to ensure that entities recuperate and rebuild after severe natural disasters that destroy things like the broadband and water and sewer, the utilities that, in my mind, are really essential?
Yes, ma'am. I would, you heard me on my opening talk about stabilization of community lifelines. There's 7 community lifelines that, regardless if you're, the District of Columbia or small town Alabama, small town West Virginia, that have to happen. The infrastructure is one of those. I would submit that utilizing the authorities of Congress and looking at our BRIC initiatives, the mitigation before a storm hits, we should harden this infrastructure before a disaster hits. There's ways to do that. You've given us, we've got $250 million additional dollars this year within that program. That will hopefully grow. So I think that we first need to look at what are we doing before a storm hits to harden this infrastructure. Quite frankly, if the power and the water can stay on, that's 90% of FEMA or a state emergency manager or a local emergency manager's problems are solved then.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Alvord, can you discuss how the Opportunity Zone initiative will generate long-term impact?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Yes, we, as you may know, have long held private investment as one of our key criterion for successful economic development. And the 2 primary focuses of EDA's traditional grant-making programs are in generating private investment and in creating jobs in economically distressed areas and regions. In the case of opportunity zones, with the additional tax incentives that are available and the qualified opportunity funds that are being formed, we see an opportunity to exponentially leverage that private investment. So we anticipate that EDA will be able to make strategic grant investments in opportunity zone areas that will create the conditions that are conducive to that investment by qualified opportunity funds. And rather than receiving a small amount of additional private investment, we could see 5, 10, 25 times or more in additional private investment flowing into those areas.
Have you run into any challenges when trying to expand opportunity zones in rural parts of the country, like West Virginia?
So the Opportunity Zone initiative is a relatively new initiative, and there's actually still a process underway to clarify all the regulations and requirements that accompany the incentive. As a result, we're seeing a lot of the early activity is flowing into areas where there are investments that are ripe and ready to move, many of those in urban areas. However, we do anticipate that as the initiative continues to mature, more and more funding will flow into other outlying areas as well.
Okay, thank you. I yield back my time.